the Nintendo Switch 2 has established itself to be more and more successful, we've seen a change in narrative from the industry. Like, as Nintendo releases more and more numbers, these guys have to kind of like move the goalpost to try and damage control the console further. Okay, initially this was something that was like not going to do as well as the Switch 2 because of the price point. Nobody liked the games for it. It was supposed to be a disaster. And now it's sold like, 17 million units. It's well on its way to becoming like a huge success. And now we're seeing the goalposts being moved. Now we're seeing them try and like gaslight people into like into thinking this isn't successful. So they have to work within the parameters of what we know, right? And so the line they settled on, the line they tried to push onto people, is that the Switch 2 is gonna be another 3DS. Like, that's what they're telling people now. It's gonna be another 3DS where it's not as successful as the original DS. Hey, genius. Like, the 3DS had a very slow launch. Okay, it didn't launch with anything. Nobody picked it up day one. And it slowly became more popular over time. Okay, the 3DS was a console that was that had to compete with the iPhone in its prime, and was just kind of a predecessor to what they would do with the Switch, where they like merged their home console and handheld divisions. Right. That was their cope. Okay, was that like the 3DS was less successful than the DS, and the Switch 2 is aligned with that trajectory. And that's very obviously not true. The Switch 2 has already outsold the 3DS, launch aligned. It's obviously well on its way to becoming like, a 100 million seller. Like, this is obviously a huge, huge deal right out the gate, unlike the 3DS. So again, this is a very good example of how like the industry analysts are trying to move goalposts to try and keep the narrative towards Nintendo negative. So it's true that the 3DS ended up winning that console generation. It was way more successful than the PS4 with way more popular and iconic games. But like, that was not true initially. The 3DS had to like kind of, fight against an entire industry that was damage controlling and hating everything Nintendo was doing at the time. And the Switch 2 is just not in that position. It does not have the competition that the 3DS has. The PlayStation isn't relevant, the PC isn't relevant, iPhone isn't relevant. Okay, none of those platforms can do what Switch 2 does. And that's becoming more and more evident all the time. As you look at the Switch and you see what Nintendo's doing, and you see like just how much better like the Nintendo games are than the competition. Like, we see this all the time from like a wide variety of people and from a wide variety of creators. Like, it's just very, very obvious that Nintendo games are just so far beyond the competition that obviously anybody who knows the first things about video games, they are going to pick up a Switch 2 by default. Okay, anybody who's serious about this hobby is going to own a Switch 2, essentially. Like, only casuals play on PC, only casuals play on console. Like, the Switch 2 is the best. And that's very, very obvious. And yet we're in this mindset right now where people want you to believe that like Nintendo is only coasting by like based on brand recognition or based on pre-existing hype, and that it's underwhelming people, and that it doesn't do anything that like other companies aren't doing better. One of my favorite lines from these people is this idea that like Switch 2 has competition now in the Steam Deck, like the implication being that the Switch only did well because it was portable and it had a handful of like third-party games on it, when it's just like nobody bought the Switch for those third-party games. For those lazy, low-effort ports that weren't very good to begin with. Like, the Switch simply was the end result of Nintendo putting out better games on their hardware and just far surpassing, what the competition was doing. That's what we're seeing now, is that Nintendo has established itself as being better than the competition, and like all the gaslighting and all the downplaying and all like, the non-gamers like trying to argue about sales numbers based on like historical trends. Like, this is what they don't understand, is that Nintendo has expanded their game portfolio, they've expanded their library, they've expanded their player base, and as a result of that, their sales are constantly going to go up over time. Okay, they are not in a position where like one bad year or one bad console release is going to somehow like undermine them. Like they don't have any direct competition. They're well established at this point. Like they're doing extraordinarily well, and we're still in this process where like the community just can't see it. Like again, these guys are talking about like 3DS sales when the movie is coming out. You know, I don't see a single one of these analysts acknowledging that the movie is going to do wonders for promoting Nintendo, Mario, Star Fox, and Pikmin. You know, like I don't see a single person acknowledging that this is another revenue stream for Nintendo, that it's basically free marketing for them. You know, and it's going to drive more people to try out their games. Like I don't see a single person acknowledging that. Like they seem to have this mindset that like the Nintendo audience is this group of people that are segregated from like more traditional like more hardcore gaming circles, but like the reality is like everyone plays Nintendo. It's like a mainstream thing now. So like what we're seeing now is just people just refusing to like acknowledge it. Like what we're seeing now is just people refusing to acknowledge that Nintendo is like mainstream culture and is just trying to act like it's some niche thing that nobody really cares about. Like again, like the amount of people I've seen who have been surprised that like Fox's appearance in like the Galaxy movie was so well received, it's insane. When like, you know, it makes perfect sense like if you've seen what the culture around Star Fox 64 is like. When you see how it's the N64 game that everyone still plays and owns today, when you see just how iconic it is and how everyone looks back on it fondly, when you see how popular it's been on Nintendo Classics, like, you know, Star Fox 64 is an all-time great game. Okay? Like, one of the all-time greats. And like, you know, the fact that they're bringing Star Fox back should be an indication of just how they're going to build their brand forward. Like, they don't need to sell people on their video games anymore, because they have multiple avenues of reaching people outside of simply playing the game and becoming a fan of it. You know, like people are becoming familiar with the characters and the ideas of these brands through like, you know, through anime, through manga, through these films now. You know, through Nintendo Directs, you know, like, you know, and more and more people are realizing that, like, you know, Nintendo has a lot more to offer than Mario, Zelda, and Pokemon. And I think that's a big thing that these analysts don't understand. Like, the big thing that really gets me about the Switch 2 generation is that the Switch 1 was playing it safe and focusing mostly on, like, you know, Mario, Zelda, like, big-name Nintendo IPs. And the Switch 2 seems more focused on bringing back franchises that have been dormant for a while. You know, we're seeing Rhythm Heaven. We're seeing Tamagotchi. We saw Donkey Kong Bonanza. We're probably going to see Star Fox. We're probably going to see F-Zero. Like, these are all huge deals. Like, and this isn't something that's going to hold back the company. This is something that's going to grow it further and, like, really establish it as, like, this huge brand. But right now, we're still in this period where everyone's in denial about it. And everyone's just doing their best to kind of write it off and ignore it. And it's something that we absolutely have to push back against.